Chapter 9. The 19th Century. France. The Eclectic School. Victor Cousin. The Positivist School. Auguste Comte. The Kantist School. Renouvier. Independent and complex positivists. Taine, Renan. LAROMIGUIÈRE. Royer-Collard. Emerging from the school of Condillac, France saw LAROMIGUIÈRE, who was a sort of softened Condillac, less trenchant, and not insensible to the influence of Rousseau, but he was little more than a clever and elegant professor of philosophy. Royer-Collard introduced into France the Scottish philosophy, Thomas Reid, Dugald Stewart, and did not depart from it or go beyond it, but he set it forth with magnificent authority, and with a remarkable invention of clever and magisterial formulae. MAINE de BIRAN. MAINE de BIRAN was a renovator. He attached himself to Descartes, linking the chain anew that had for so long been interrupted. He devoted his attention to the notion of ego. In full reaction from the sensualism of Condillac, he restored due activity to the ego. He made it a force not restricted to the reception of sensations, which transform themselves, but one which seized upon, elaborated, linked together, and combined them. For him then, as for Descartes, but from a fresh point of view, the voluntary deed is the primitive deed of the soul, and the will is the foundation of man. Also, the will is not all man. Man has, so to say, three lives superimposed but very closely interunited, and which cannot be without one another. The life of sensation, the life of will, and the life of love. The life of sensation is almost passive, with a commencement of activity which consists in classifying and organizing the sensations. The life of will is, properly speaking, the human life. The life of love is the life of activity, and yet again of will, but which unites the human with the divine life. By the ingenious and profound subtlety of his analyses, MAINE de BIRAN has placed himself in the front rank of French thinkers, and, in any case, he is one of the most original. Victor Cousin and his disciples. Victor Cousin, who appears to have been influenced almost concurrently by MAINE de BIRAN, Royer-Collard, and the German philosophy, yielded rapidly to a tendency which is characteristically French, and is also, perhaps, good, and which consists in seeing some good in all the opinions, and he was eclectic, that is, a borrower. His maxim, which he had no doubt read in Leibniz, was that the systems are true in what they affirm and false in what they deny. Starting thence, he rested upon both the English and German philosophy, correcting one by the other. Personally, his tendency was to make metaphysics come from philosophy, and to prove God by the human soul, and the relations of God with the world, by the relations of man with matter. To him God is always an augmented human soul. All philosophies, not to mention all religions, have rather an inclination to consider things thus. But this tendency is particularly marked in Cousin. In the course of his career, which was diversified, for he was at one time a professor and at another a statesman, he varied somewhat, because before 1830 he became very Hegelian, and after 1830, he harked back towards Descartes, endeavoring especially to make philosophic instruction a moral priesthood, highly cautious, very well balanced, feeling great distrust of the unassailable temerities of the one, and in sympathetic relations with the other. What has remained of this eclecticism is an excellent thing, the great regard for the history of philosophy, which had never been held in honor in France, and which, since Cousin, has never ceased to be so. The principal disciples of Cousin were Jouffroy, Damierre, Émile Sasset, and the great moralist Jules Simon, well known because of the important political part he played. LAMENNAIS. LAMENNAIS, long celebrated for his great book, Essay on Indifference in the Matter of Religion, then, when he had severed himself from Rome, by his Words of a Believer and other works of revolutionary spirit, was above all a publicist, but he was a philosopher, properly speaking, in his sketch of a philosophy. To him, God is neither the creator, as understood by the early Christians, nor the being from whom the world emanates, as others have thought. He has not created the world from nothing, but he has created it. He created it from himself, he made it issue from his substance, and he made it issue by a purely voluntary act. He created it in his own image. It is not man alone who is in the image of God, but the whole world. The three persons of God, that is, the three characteristics, power, intelligence, and love, are found diminished and disfigured indeed, but yet are to be found in every being in the universe. They are especially our own three powers, under the form of will, reason, sympathy. They are also the three powers of society, under the forms of executive power, deliberation, and fraternity. Every being, individual or collective, has in it a principle of death if it cannot reproduce, however imperfectly, all the three terms of this trinity, without the loss of one. Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte, a mathematician, versed also in all sciences, constructed a preeminently negative philosophy in spite of his great pretension to replace the negations of the 18th century by a positive doctrine. Above all else, he denied all authority, and denied to metaphysics the right of existence. Metaphysics ought not to exist, do not exist, are mere nothing. We know nothing, we can know nothing, about the commencement or the end of things, or yet their essence or their object. Philosophy has always laid down as its task a general explanation of the universe. It is precisely this general explanation, all general explanation of the aggregate of things, which is impossible. This is the negative part of positivism. It is the only one which has endured, and which is the credo or rather the non-credo of a fairly large number of minds. The affirmative part of the ideas of Comte was this. What can be done is to make a classification of sciences and a philosophy of history. The classification of sciences according to Comte, proceeding from the most simple to the most complex, that is, from mathematics to astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology to and sociology, is generally considered by the learned as interesting but arbitrary. The philosophy of history, according to Comte, is this. Humanity passes through three states: theological, metaphysical, positive. The theological state, antiquity, consists in man explaining everything by continual miracles. The metaphysical state, modern times, consists in man explaining everything by ideas, which he still continues to consider somewhat as beings, by abstractions, entities, vital principle, attraction, gravitation, soul, faculty of the soul, etc. The positive state consists in that man explains and will explain all things, or rather limits himself, and will limit himself to verifying them, by the links that he will see they have with one another, links he will content himself with observing, and subsequently with controlling by experiment. Also, there is always something of the succeeding state in the preceding state, and the ancients did not ignore observation, and there is always something of the preceding state in the succeeding state, and we have still theological and metaphysical habits of mind, theological and metaphysical residues, and perhaps it will be always thus, but for theology to decline before metaphysics and metaphysics before science's progress. Over and above this, Comte in the last portion of his life as, if to prove his doctrine of residues, and to furnish an example, founded a sort of religion, a pseudo-religion, the religion of humanity. Humanity must be worshipped in its slow ascent towards intellectual and moral perfection, and, in consequence, we should specially worship humanity to come. But Comte might reply that humanity past and present is venerable because it bears in its womb the humanity of the future. The worship of this new religion is the commemoration and veneration of the dead. These last conceptions, fruits of the sensibility and of the imagination of Auguste Comte, have no relation with the basis of his doctrine. Renouvier. After him, by a vigorous reaction, Renouvier restored the philosophy of Kant, depriving it of its too symmetrical, too minutely systematic, too scholastic character, and bringing it nearer to facts. From him was to come the doctrine already mentioned, pragmatism, which measures the truth of every idea by the moral consequence that it contains. Taine. Very different and attaching himself to the general ideas of Comte, Taine believed only in what has been observed, experimented, and demonstrated, but being also as familiar with Hegel as with Comte, with Spencer as with Condillac, he never doubted that the need of going beyond and escaping from oneself was also a fact, a human fact eternal among humanity, and of this fact he took account as of a fact observed and proved, saying if man is on one side a fierce and lascivious gorilla, on the other side he is a mystic animal, and that in a double nature, mysterious hymen, as Hugo wrote, lay the explanation of all the baseness in ideas and actions, as well as all the sublimity in ideas and actions of humanity. Personally he was a Stoic, and his practice was the continuous development of the intelligence regarded as the condition and guarantee of morality. Renan, destined for the ecclesiastical profession and always preserving profound traces of his clerical education, was, nevertheless, a positivist and believed only in science, hoping everything from it in youth, and continuing to venerate it at least during his mature years. Thus formed, a Christian positivist, as has been said, as well as a poet above all else, he could not prescribe metaphysics, and had a weakness for them, with which perhaps he reproached himself. He extricated himself from this difficulty by declaring all metaphysical conceptions to be only dreams, but sheltered, so to say, by this concession he had made and this precaution he had taken, he threw himself into the dream with all his heart and reconstituted God, the immortal soul, the future existence, eternity and creation, giving them new, unforeseen, and fascinating names. It was only the idea of providence, that is, of the particular and circumstantial intervention of God in human affairs, which was intolerable to him, and against which he always protested, quoting the phrase of Malebranche, God does not act by particular wills. And yet he paid a compliment, which seems sincere, to the idea of grace, and if there be a particular and circumstantial intervention by God in human affairs, it is certainly grace according to all appearances. He was above all an amateur of ideas, a dilettante in ideas, toying with them with infinite pleasure, like a superior Greek sophist, and in all French philosophy, no one calls Plato to mind more than he does. He possessed a charming mind, a very lofty character, and was a marvelous writer. Today, the living French philosophers whom we shall content ourselves with naming because they are living and receive contemporary criticism rather than that of history, are MM. Feuilly, Theodore Roubaud, Layard, Durkheim, Isolet, and Bergson.